You probably bend down, pinch a stubborn green sprout between your fingers, and toss it onto the compost pile without a second thought. What if that same sprout could staunch a bleed, calm an irritated skin, or add omega-3s to a salad? Stay with me, because hidden in ordinary lawns are 11 weeds with real antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory chemistry. Some have battlefield stories. Others were staples of monastery gardens or indigenous first aid kits. 2 to watch as you listen. Number 4 is sheep sorrel, the one that shows up in a controversial herbal formula with decades of attention. And number 1, creeping Charlie, which researchers have been curious about for more than 40 years. A quick safety note before we begin. The studies I'll mention are promising, often laboratory or early clinical work, but none of these plants are a replacement for prescribed antibiotics or medical care. If you're on medication, pregnant, or have a health condition, check with a professional before using wild herbs. If this kind of backyard medicine interests you, hit like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments which plant you'd like a how-to video on next. Start with the sting everyone remembers, stinging nettle. You can recognize it by the jagged opposite leaves and the fine hairs along the stems and undersides that deliver a rush of histamine and formic acid when brushed. That sting is also a sign. Nettle's chemistry is active. Traditionally, it has been used as a blood-staunching compress, a tonic, and an anti-inflammatory. Soldiers and rural folk alike praised its powers. In modern research, nettle leaf and root extracts have been studied for symptoms of benign prostatic hyperplasia and for allergic rhinitis. Laboratory assays also show antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds like formic acid derivatives, flavonoids, and lectins. For practical use in the yard, neutralize the sting by blanching the leaves in boiling water for 30 to 60 seconds, then plunge into cold water. The leaves lose their sting and become a spinach-like green for soups, sautés, or a mineral-rich tea. To make an infused oil for topical use, dry the leaves briefly, then steep in warm oil for several days before straining. This oil can calm irritated skin or be mixed into a salve. Caution: nettle can interact with blood pressure and blood-thinning medications and may trigger allergies in sensitive people. Always wear gloves when harvesting if you haven't blanched the plant, and avoid plants from herbicide-sprayed lawns. If something small and leathery with parallel veins is pushing up through compacted soil, you're likely looking at plantain, not the banana, but Plantago major or Plantago lanceolata. Plantain has long been a first aid staple. Folk healers called it woundwort, because a quick chew and a poultice applied to a scrape or splinter often eased pain and helped pull out debris. Indigenous communities in North America adopted plantain for these uses alongside European settlers. The plant's active molecules, like orcubin and actioside, have antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and wound healing actions in laboratory studies. A clinical touchstone often cited is a 2015 burn trial where topical plantain preparations helped with discomfort and skin recovery, a promising result, though not a universal cure-all. Use plantain as a fresh poultice. Crush a few leaves between clean fingers or mortar and pestle, apply to the cleaned minor wound, and secure with a bandage. For daily care, infuse leaves in oil for salves or make a mild tea to soothe itchy skin. Caution: be sure you've got the right Plantago species. Avoid using on deep or infected wounds without medical care. Moving up the list, yarrow, with its ferny foliage and flat clusters of white or pink flowers that look like miniature umbrellas. Legends say soldiers used it to staunch bleeding. The name Achilles is associated with folk stories because the plant's compounds help tighten vessels and reduce bleeding in superficial wounds. Chemically, yarrow contains alkaloids and tannins that lend antimicrobial and astringent properties. It also has flavonoids that reduce inflammation. Laboratory studies show its extracts can inhibit certain bacteria and aid in mild wound care. and historically it's been brewed as a fever tea by field medics. For practical use, make a tea to rinse minor scrapes or compresses. Steep a handful of fresh flowers and leaves in hot water, cool to tepid, and apply with a clean cloth. Caution: if you take blood thinners or have a bleeding disorder, avoid internal use. Its astringent compounds can interact with anticoagulant medications. Dandelion is one of the most familiar green invaders. Toothed, toothy leaves radiating from a central rosette, and the bright yellow flowers that become those familiar seed puffs. Every part of the plant is edible and nutrient-dense. Leaves are high in vitamins and minerals, the root has bitter compounds that stimulate bile, and flowers can be made into syrups or wine. Diuretic effects and digestive support are among the traditional uses. In labs, dandelion extracts show antimicrobial and antioxidant activity, and small human studies have looked at its effect on fluid balance and digestion. For the backyard cook, harvest young leaves before the plant bolts to avoid intense bitterness. Toss them into salads or blanch them, or roast the roots as a coffee substitute. Caution: because dandelion is a mild diuretic and interacts with some medications, people on diuretics or certain heart medications should consult a clinician. Also, avoid lawns treated with chemicals. A small succulent with glossy, paddle-shaped leaves that glisten in the sun is likely purslane. This garden weed is a nutritional powerhouse. It's unusually high in plant-based omega-3 fatty acids for a land plant, and it contains antioxidants like glutathione and even mild amounts of melatonin. Many cultures have eaten purslane as a salad green or cooked vegetable. Laboratory studies point to antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory constituents. Its crunchy texture and slightly lemony tang make it a lively addition to salads, stews, or pickles. When foraging, pick from clean areas away from traffic and avoid lawns sprayed with herbicides. Caution: purslane contains oxalates and can be high in nitrates if harvested from fertilized lawns. People prone to kidney stones or on certain medications should exercise caution and consult a professional. Chickweed is soft, low-growing, and covered in tiny opposite leaves and delicate white flowers. It has a long folk history as an anti-itch and cooling compress for eczema and insect bites. The plant contains saponins and phytosterols, which can reduce inflammation and soothe irritated skin. Laboratory work supports mild antibacterial action, and traditional herbalists often recommend an infused oil or salve. To make an infused oil, gently bruise fresh chickweed, pack it into a jar, cover with a neutral oil like olive or sunflower, and let it sit in a warm place for 1 to 2 weeks before straining. That oil becomes a gentle moisturizer for itchy patches. Caution: some people may be sensitive. Never apply to open, infected wounds, and stop use if irritation occurs. Prunella vulgaris, commonly called self-heal, is unassuming. A low, spike-flowered plant with purple or blue flower heads that hides in lawns and meadows. It earned the name because folk healers used it for mouth sores, sore throats, and minor internal inflammations. People literally used it to mend small damages. Self-heal contains rosmarinic acid, ursolic acid, and flavonoids like rutin. These compounds have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and antiviral signals in laboratory studies. In vitro work suggests activity against certain viruses and microbes, and herbalists brew it as a soothing tea for sore throats or use a mouth rinse for aphthous ulcers. For a simple preparation, steep a tablespoon of fresh flowers and leaves in a cup of hot water for 10 minutes and sip as needed. Caution: evidence is preliminary. Avoid assuming it replaces antiviral medications or prescribed care. Halfway through the list, we find sheep sorrel, a tangy, arrowhead-shaped leaf plant that tastes sharply of lemon when chewed. It's well known in herbal lore because René Caus popularized an herbal formula called Essiac that included sheep sorrel and drew attention for decades. Sheep sorrel contains oxalic acid, which gives it that sharp flavor, and other bioactive compounds that have shown cytotoxic effects in laboratory studies. Researchers have long been curious about its compounds and interactions. That said, laboratory cytotoxicity is not clinical proof of efficacy in human disease. Much more study is required. Culinary uses are simple. A few young leaves add a bright zip to salads and soups, but because of oxalates, limit large quantities and avoid regular heavy use if you have kidney stone history. Caution: oxalates can contribute to kidney stone formation in susceptible people. Consult a clinician before using medicinally, and never substitute this plant for conventional cancer treatments. Cleavers is the plant that climbs. Thin, square stems with tiny hooked hairs that let it cling to clothing, and opposite, lance-shaped leaves forming whorls. Traditionally valued as a lymphatic tonic, cleavers was used to relieve swollen glands and to support the lymphatic system after infections. It contains iridoids and flavonoids that give it mild diuretic and anti-inflammatory actions. Some herbalists recommend a strong infusion or fresh-pressed juice during lymphatic congestion. To use it, harvest before flowering in spring for the most tender stems and make a cold infusion. Cover chopped fresh cleavers with cool water, let steep several hours to overnight, then strain. Drink small amounts as a supportive tonic or use topically as a soothing compress. Caution: external use is usually safe, but avoid using on broken skin or relying on it instead of medical advice for serious infections. Ground elder, sometimes called bishop's weed, has a long story in monastery gardens where medieval monks cultivated it for medicinal and culinary uses. It has triangular, toothed leaves and umbrella-like flower clusters, and an earthy, savory scent when crushed. Historically used for gout and as a diuretic, ground elder contains compounds thought to help with inflammation and fluid balance. In the kitchen, young leaves picked in spring are less bitter and can be used like parsley or spinach. Harvest in the early season before the plant flowers, because leaves become tough and bitter after blooming. Caution: ground elder is invasive in many gardens and can be bitter after flowering. People with sensitivities should taste a small amount first and avoid heavy internal use without professional guidance. And now for the grand reveal: Creeping Charlie, also called Glechoma hederaceae or ground ivy, the carpet-forming weed you've likely fought with poison or mower. It's low, with round-toothed leaves and purple tubular flowers. Crush a leaf and you'll notice a minty, almost camphoraceous scent. Nicholas Culpeper wrote about it centuries ago, and modern botanists have kept taking samples into the lab. Creeping Charlie contains rosmarinic acid, ursolic acid, luteolin, and apigenin, compounds known for anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antimicrobial activity. Over the last 40-plus years, laboratory and a handful of clinical investigations have suggested it has broad biological activity, ranging from antibacterial effects to neuroprotective signals in preliminary studies. That long thread of research is why it's such an ironic presence in lawns, a plant people spray away despite a surprising chemical resume. Use it as a tea, steeping a small handful of fresh leaves in hot water, or add tender shoots sparingly to soups. It's pungent, so a little goes a long way. Caution: confirm identification carefully, avoid lawns treated with herbicides, and don't assume it can replace medical treatment for infections or neurological conditions. Before we pull back, a few practical threads tie these plants together. First, identification matters. When in doubt, compare leaves, flowers, and growth habit to reliable field guides or local foraging groups. Second, harvest from chemical-free spaces. Avoid roadsides and lawns treated with pesticides or herbicides. Third, start small with oral use. Taste a tiny piece first and wait to watch for reactions. And if you're on prescription medication, check for interactions, especially with diuretics, blood thinners, or diabetes drugs. Fourth, many of the medicinal actions people seek, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, lymphatic support, were often used traditionally as first-line low-risk measures: poultices, compresses, infused oils, and mild teas. These approaches support minor injuries and everyday discomforts, but aren't a substitute for antibiotics or emergency care. So, what are 3 small, immediate things you can do this week to get started? Learn to confidently identify one plant in your own yard. Plantain is a great starter because it's obvious and has a safe topical use. Second, learn one preparation. Make a simple infused oil, olive oil and dried plantain or chickweed, to have on hand for minor scrapes. Third, assemble a small wild first aid kit: gloves, tweezers, clean cloths, a jar of infused oil, and a fresh plant poultice option like plantain. Respect the plant. Take only what you need, leave enough for pollinators and soil health, and always ask permission before foraging on private land. To wrap up, those little green invaders might be more than nuisances. Across cultures and centuries, people have used them as wound herbs, nutrient-rich greens, and mild antimicrobial agents. Modern science is catching up in labs and early trials, often confirming traditional observations about anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial chemistry. But the evidence is usually preliminary and never a blanket guarantee. If this list surprised you, share which plant you'd like a deep dive on next, and subscribe for more backyard plant spotlights and safe foraging how-tos. Tell us in the comments where you find these plants and any stories you've inherited from family or neighbors. Go put on gloves, find a patch of unmown lawn, and see what your yard has been quietly offering all along.